Welcome to Talk to Me. I'm Dr. Venita Kelly with co-host Ms. Felicia Chapelle. Our first guest is Senator Cheryl Brown, who has made time to speak with us yet again about matters related to the COVID-19 pandemic. This is What's Hot. How you doing, Senator Brown?
Doing good, thank you. And you?
Good. Thank you for taking our questions. On your website, we see you sent a letter to the president calling for ramped-up testing, contact tracing, and stronger protections for workers prior to relaxing social distancing guidelines. What could be at risk here?
Well, there's not been nearly enough testing yet done in Ohio, and that's really the responsibility of the President of the United States to have built a whole national program to get more testing. The President should have built a national program to get more protective equipment to people, and we shouldn't be opening the economy broadly until every worker is protected on the job, the grocery store worker and the bus driver and the person cleaning that does the laundry in a hospital, to the security, to the people that are mostly low-wage workers, new workers coming back to work. They should be protected. Then we need to do a lot more testing to make sure that people are protected. The President of the United States has been so slow to come around to do what we need to do.
You joined Kamala Harris and Elizabeth Warren in drafting legislation that would require the Department of Health and Human Services to compile data on racial and other demographics surrounding the COVID-19 crisis. Similar legislation in the House had over 80 co-sponsors. If passed, will the data be used to achieve equitable health care, policy, and laws?
Yes, that's the whole point that Senator Harris and Senator Warren and I are aiming at. I mean, think about this coronavirus has shown such a spotlight on the inequalities and the disparities in our system. Everything from housing, coming from the days of Jim Crow, redlining, to housing discrimination today, disparities in life expectancy, the disparities in infant mortality, and disparities in healthcare generally. The best way to address this, we need all the data possible. You disaggregate by race and gender and neighborhood and all that. I mean, my wife and I live in Cleveland in zip code 44105. In 2007 had more foreclosures than any zip code in the United States of America. That tells me a lot about my neighborhood and what we need to do. There are still too many abandoned homes, still too many homes with high levels of lead-based paint that exposes children to potential learning disabilities, all those things. We've got to gather that information in a more systematic way. And then starting in next year, with, I hope, a new president, Congress needs to start dealing with it and start fixing these disparities.
To switch gears, what safeguards were added to the second coronavirus stimulus package to ensure funding is distributed to minority and rural underserved businesses?
Well, we saw the Trump administration basically go to help the big guys with all this business money and went to the largest banks and the largest businesses. There are some others that got help, to be sure, but most of it went to the big guys, and that's who they are. That's who the Secretary of the Treasury and the President and the President's cabinet and the President's friends are. He's helping himself first and his buddies, Trump hotels or wherever. So we wrote very specific language that more of this had to go through community banks, through minority-owned banks. More of this had to go to small businesses, so barbershops and daycare centers and beauty salons, and where there are many people of color who run these small businesses, self-employed people, entrepreneurs. The other thing is we're watching closely. We're making sure that what our intent was here will be carried out by the administration, because they frankly aren't particularly trustworthy on this. Maybe most politicians do, but this president done it way more than most, helping his friends at the expense of working class families.
What are the highlights of the tele-roundtable discussion with Dayton healthcare advocates, policymakers, and community leaders about the disproportionate impact of COVID-19 on Black and brown communities?
I just earlier spoke with about a dozen, maybe a few more than that, school nurses, doctors, small businesses in the Black community, a couple of elected officials, public health people, the mayor of Trotwood, all people that have been hit hard in their jobs and personally by the coronavirus. It's clear that we're not getting to them so they can help their constituency and the people they want. We're not getting the testing resources, testing kits and all. We're not getting the protective equipment. Many people are lucky enough to be home and do their jobs and get paid from the safety of their homes. But think of the number of people and who they are that go to work. They're more likely women than men. They're a higher percentage of people of color. They're the grocery store clerks and the bus drivers. They're the people that do the laundry and people that do security and food preparation. They're making $10, $12, $15 an hour maybe in exposing themselves, and then when they go home, their families to this potential illness. We've got to get them the protective equipment. We've got to get them the testing, and we've got to get them more pay because of the risk they're putting on themselves.
Could you talk a little bit about the bill to repeal the GOP tax giveaway?
Yeah, while Congress was mostly doing the right thing and getting help out to unemployed workers, to individuals who are hard hit by this, to more money to hospitals and local communities in Clark County or Greene County or wherever. At the same time, Mitch McConnell and President Trump snuck a little tax cut in there in hundreds and hundreds of page bills, a little tax cut for not just millionaires, but people making more than $1 million a year. A millionaire is defined as somebody worth $1 million. These are people actually making more than $1 million a year. They get $100 billion. That's $100,000 million tax cut. And it's only a few thousand families in the United States. And that McConnell would use this bill to reward his special interest friends is unfortunately what his whole career has been, the Republican leader of the Senate. But it's particularly egregious and reprehensible at a time like this.
Senator Brown, thank you. We really appreciate getting this information out to the community.
Thanks so much.
Community, our conversation with Ms. Cheryl Phoenix of the Black Child Agenda took place just weeks before the pandemic caused us to have copious amounts of time inside. Perhaps we can make a blessing of her leadership and the time the quarantine is giving us to think about, plan, and then put into action the advice, insights, and strategies she shares regarding ensuring quality education and quality educational environments for our children and eliminating the school-to-prison pipeline there in the UK and in the United States.
This is Felicia Chapelle.
And this is Dr. Venita Kelly. On Talk to Me, we are on a mission to empower our communities by considering what holds us back and what takes us forward.
What do we do that gives our power away, and what do we need to tap into the best of our abilities? What strengthens the actions we already take to develop and sustain our communities?
So throughout the show, listen for how we define, discuss, and provide a course of action to support community, self-sustainability, and uplift.
Listen for how we define the problem, discuss the details, and uncover a way forward to focus on solutions. We're grateful today to be joined by Ms. Cheryl Phoenix, founder of community interest corporation, the Black Child Agenda. This CIC was developed to address the school-to-prison pipeline and to educate parents, young people, and community members on the laws around education.
Her organization started in 2013. The Black Child Agenda has grown into an international and multi-award-winning organization. Welcome to Talk to Me, Ms. Cheryl Phoenix.
Hi, good afternoon, and thank you for having me.
We're so glad you're here. So by using statistical research to quantify the alarming trends where we see Black children are disproportionately targeted for exclusionary discipline tactics in the school system, your organization, the Black Child Agenda, is confronting these institutionalized areas. To bring context to the show, we're going to pull a quote from Dr. Amos Wilson, Institute scholar. The late Dr. Amos Wilson was a Pan-Africanist, as you know, a theoretical psychologist who taught at City University of New York. His book, The Awakening of the Natural Genius of Black Children, and he inspired Cam Howard, and Cam Howard writes in a similar titled research abstract, quote, "There are many examples of giants amongst us whose natural intellectual abilities went unrecognized early in their education, or whose intellectual proclivities simply were not nurtured. In fact, in some cases, their lights were extinguished by a racist society, school system, and or teachers who believed them to be inferior or unfit. Many of these individuals only later, through some incident or chance encounter with the right motivation or stimulus, tapped into their genius," end quote.
We know how important this is to enter this conversation on the marginalization of our Black student boys and girls. You've shared publicly that your husband passed away and that you witnessed some unacceptable treatment of your son at school. That was when this current work developed. So would you please walk us through how you started the Black Child Agenda?
Well, yeah, as a parent, as you said, my husband passed away, and I didn't know whether I was coming or going. He was very ill with sickle cell, in hospital. Then he met his demise in February 2007. But whilst I was going through that time, my two youngest children at the time were maybe 14 and 15, were at school, but every single day of the week they were going into isolation. And when I say isolation, I mean exactly that. Similar to the prison system, they will be put in a room all day by themselves, sometimes with no lunch, no interaction with any other children, and left there until school finished. And this was a constant. Now, as a parent, I'm quite feisty, to say the least, and I would contact the school. I started writing to my MP. I started writing to solicitors. I started writing to everyone I can think of, because I wasn't understanding why my children were being treated this way and what my actual rights were. So I just started a mission, because what I did notice was that in my local community of Northwest London was that there were so many young black males in particular who were not in school, had not been permanently excluded from school, but not allowed to return to the building. And from that, I just picked up on it, and I was like, well, there's something going on here. So I recognized that with regards to, we've got places in the UK called PRUs, pupil referral units, where if you have been permanently excluded, this is where they send you. And these places are a hotbed for violent crime, grooming, drugs, sexual molestation of girls in particular, and children with mental health issues end up being drug runners or county line runners in the UK. So that came about, and I was like, not my sons.
So, do I hear you correctly in saying that you and your family, your children, were involved in a grief process when these periods of isolations were imparted on their young souls?
Absolutely. Isolation even more so has increased in UK schools. We have children who have mental health conditions, autism, ADHD, and such like, who are left in these rooms for weeks and weeks on end. And the problem is with this that I have, for example, one of my clients, because I'm an independent advocate. So as an advocate, I get to see and hear the real deal of what's going on. And, we've had children where their hair has started falling out because they're so stressed out. They become incontinent because they're so scared. Self-harming is a big problem. And some of them even eating glass just so they don't have to go back to school or be in that school environment.
I know that myself as a parent, I personally have wondered why so much of the information coming home at the beginning of the school year is focused on discipline. I know here in the U.S., we're seeing in increasing numbers elementary school students as young as 6 and 7 years old, some with autism, being cuffed and taken out of the public school building by law enforcement. This can't all be due to increased incidents of inappropriate behavior in school-age individuals. There's a little more to this. So tell us a little about the legal and ethical implications, such as these tactics are presenting, especially concerning special needs and children of color in regards to their rights to an education.
Mm-hmm. The fact is as well, like when you look at the school systems, I know you've got the difference out here with charter schools and government-assisted schools, am I right?
Yes, correct.
So what happens in the UK is that a lot of these schools have now become academies, which is, I believe, similar to the charter school system where they're kind of like private businesses. Mm-hmm. So most of the schools that you find in the UK, they've been sold to private businesses. So private companies are running these things, and it's all about number crunching and money. The children's individual needs has not been taken into consideration. We have a thing in the UK called an educational healthcare plan. So if a child has a mental health, SEMH, social, emotional, mental health condition, then this EHC plan, educational healthcare plan, is there to protect that child from 0 right up to the age of 25 so that it helps them through university, through college, etc., etc. However, what's happening, because to get that plan, a lot of these schools need to pay maybe £2,000, which may be about $2,300, for an educational psychologist to come into the school and assess the child. They don't want to do that. So rather than do that, they leave these children with clear needs. You can see that this child has clear needs that need to be met and that are not being met. They get locked in isolation rooms all day. Self-harming becomes an issue. Incontinence, scratching, biting. Sometimes children even running out into the streets because they can get out of the building. These things are a massive issue in the UK schools. And the unfortunate thing is that it's predominantly Black, African, Caribbean children and also mixed-race children. Once they have hue, then they're either being kicked out or their mental health needs are not being taken care of, which in the UK is unlawful, but the schools don't care.
Yeah, this is definitely very disturbing.
Mm-hmm. There are many theories on what spawns the hatred, prejudice, and racism towards people with melanated skin. So we know our experiences are valid, our observations are valid, but also statistical data now gives us clear evidence of disproportionate disciplinary measures doled out to Black and brown children. For our listeners who are gaining knowledge about this phenomenon and may not have observed or even noticed it happening here as well as across the seas, please just lay out for us what the school to prison pipeline is and how important it is to research it and pushing the resistance movement about its existence and function forward.
Right. The interesting thing is the school to prison pipeline, from what I've seen and witnessed with regards to my own,
even though they haven't been to prison, was that in the education system, there's a lot of bullying that goes on from particularly European teachers towards black students. And these students can be as young as 4 and 5 years old. So these are little babies. And it gets to a point where the isolation daily. After a certain amount of time, you're allowed up to 45 days in any one academic year to be excluded, whether that's an isolation room or you're sent home for a fixed-term exclusion. The maximum fixed-term exclusion should be up to 10 days unless you have an investigation. So what tends to happen is the school will permanently exclude or isolate this child for silly things, small things, talk to the child in a particular way that's rude, demeaning, could go against the color of their skin if they're dark skinned, telling children that you're too dark to sit over there, sit over here in the light, telling them that they're nothing but slaves. So as a child in an environment for 6 hours a day, being told that you're basically worthless and you have contributed nothing to the world, that's going to make you feel some type of way. With this, then sometimes you have children with behavior problems. Again, they're treated a particular type of way. So it's easy then to isolate the child in this room or send them home for a fixed-term exclusion. After a certain amount of time, or if a child's being bullied, particularly young girls, we find a lot of young black girls are being bullied by a lot of white girls. If that young black child responds, she's automatically permanently excluded. That means she can no longer go to school, or the boy. With that, then you go to the pupil referral unit. Now, in the UK, a lot of these pupil referral units are run, owned, and managed by G4S Security. Now, G4S Security are the same security company who also run a lot of the juvenile detention centres and prisons. Now, when children are in this environment, for example, if you have a student that's an A-star grade, by the time they go to the pupil referral unit, i.e. the proof, they will be lucky if they leave with a G or even a pass, because the exams that they're given will be in maybe art, or I'm not saying that there's anything wrong with art, but if you've got a child that's academically gifted and talented in the sciences, art is no use to them. If they're lucky, less than 1% of children leave pupil referral units with any grade. So if your child's in that pupil referral unit, it's very easy for them to be groomed by outsiders to carry drugs. And that grooming can take place with giving them £20 in cash, buying them something to eat after school, buying them a new pair of trainers. Then that becomes take this package across the road. If they get caught, or it could be take this knife, because we have a problem with stabbings in the UK. If they get caught, the first thing they're going to do is go to court, and there's an example being set by the UK court systems to actually lock up a lot of these young people from the age of 14, 15, 16, and they get locked up. So right there, what I've broken down, it may have been a bit long-winded, but I wanted you to get the full context of how the school-to-prison pipeline actually works for us in the UK right now, and it is working perfectly.
Yeah, I definitely hear exactly what you're saying in regards to there seems to be a systemic plan so that the children are first demeaned and over-disciplined, and after some time they've been broken down, and then they're isolated, and then the law allows up to a certain number of days where they're allowed to be isolated, then they're permanently removed, and then that disenfranchisement leads them toward criminal activity, and it seems to be all set up for them to indeed fail.
Absolutely, systematic construct of failure. What I say from a personal perspective, I always say that they may have taken the physical shackles and chains off our hands and feet, but what they're doing to our children's minds, we have a new generation like myself as a parent and parents that may be 30 upwards, who are a new generation of parents trying to raise our children and empower them. However, what we fail to understand is that we're sending them into the hands of the enemy for 6 to 8 hours every single day, where they're breaking down everything that we're building up in our young people. They're breaking it back down. And our children, when they entered their school systems, they were fine, happy, eager to learn, academically gifted and talented. And then by the time they leave there, they're sad, they're miserable, they're angry, and then they become very aggressive. We see it, like I said, on the streets of London every day. Every single day of the week, a young black man is killed by another young black man because of that self-hate that has been instilled in them from primary right through to college age.
Community, this is Dr. Venita Kelly and myself, Felicia Chapelle of Talk to Me. Our guest is Cheryl Phoenix, founder of the Black Child Agenda, based in the United Kingdom. So far, we have been discussing some of the very disturbing statistics and incidents that are being captured and observed, where young people are being systemically and systematically broken down so that eager to learn children are becoming criminalized in a very serious and harsh way through isolation campaigns against them at the school where they attend. This is turning into a very big problem, not just there, but all over. And we're talking today about the different things that are happening with the Black Child Agenda that is kind of a watch force that's trying to take action against this despairing disturbance.
One of the objectives of the Black Child Agenda is to advocate for parents and young people facing discrimination in education, mental health, criminal justice, and children and family systems there in the UK. To educate parents, young people, and community members on the law around education is a key piece of the process. You are the Black Child Agenda making parents aware that others are also taking action against the mistreatment of your youth, correct?
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And can I also just say as well that with regards to the education system doing this, we've gone from, as an organization, just dealing with exclusions to now dealing with mental health and trauma in parents, to dealing with counseling in parents in particular, and also the young people, to dealing with social services, where schools are using social services as a weapon against parents. If parents don't conform and comply, then they call social workers and say that the child has been mistreated, there's a safeguarding concern, where social services are now coming in and taking children and having them farmed out to the countryside, and parents don't see their children ever again. And, this is something that's going on. We have a massive problem with the criminalization, as you mentioned, of black boys and girls. And this could be, the age of criminalization, criminal responsibility in the UK is 10 years old.
Wow.
So at 10 years old, you could make a sad mistake or be encouraged to, particularly if a child is autistic and it's not clearly visible. These children are being groomed into gang activity, gang lifestyle, and actually taking people's lives. But, officers of the law don't see that. They just see a black male and they need to be taken down. Luckily, they don't yet carry guns, but that's something that's also coming as well. So we're dealing with everything from immigration, housing, children's services, education, employment. All of these areas is that what we've now had to take on with this Black Child Agenda, because the discrimination is so endemic, it's so systematic, and it's blatant, but no one wants to talk about it in the UK, but I do, and I will continue to until my last breath.
And this is a very important conversation, and I'm glad that you're taking a firm stance and discussing it. I do hear you're saying that you are an advocate and that the parents sometimes are targeted as well for not complying, and that as an advocate you are dealing with the discrimination in the education system, the mental health, how that is leading children toward the criminal justice system where they were otherwise eager to learn, young adults and very young elementary age, primary age children there in the UK. And it doesn't stop there. We see these incidences here on stateside as well. So to educate parents, young people, and community members on the laws around education, I think is a key part, I understand, of your process, like letting parents know that other people are also taking action and kind of a safety in numbers so that we can have some pushback against the mistreatment of our youth. Can you talk a little about that?
Absolutely. So what I do is I've just recently started doing a lot of online workshops with parents, and what we regularly do is conferences. And with that, seminars and conferences and different workshops, I have up to sometimes 15 speakers. And the reason being is that I make sure I cover all the elements: crime, education, children and families, working in social services, mental health. We give the parents the factual, lawful information on how to challenge the school. If your child's been permanently excluded, how you challenge that and have it overturned. How you actually challenge if your son has been stopped and searched on a regular basis, or you feel that they're being criminalized, or they're being groomed into gang lifestyle. So we basically empower parents to know what signs to look for, how searching your children's room is necessary if you feel they're carrying a knife or a sword, because some of them are carrying swords and machetes. Some of these children are as young as 10 and 11 years old. So, we make sure that everything is covered in those conferences, so usually one-day conferences. We travel from London up to as far as Birmingham, Leeds, Bristol, Coventry. I think the equivalent in the USA would be from Miami, because that was 3 hours flight, up to maybe even Detroit, where I'm calling you from today. We cover quite a vast area.
With the observations that you've made in this professional capacity and the work you've taken on, can we go so far as to say that school systems are operating with the default assumption that every child in the student population must be able to reference affluence and wealth, stability in the home, able-bodied physiques, and actually whiteness to successfully participate in the education environment? In what ways do we see evidence that this is the mind frame at play in that system?
Well, the interesting thing is that when I look at the work I do, like I said, countrywide, I take one of two things. Either the black child and family are every single one of us are completely all dysfunctional, all of our children are wrong, we just have a problem. It has to be that, because the only other thing that can be is the systematic construct of racism playing itself out to our children. And our children cannot defend themselves. Because the interesting thing is when you have a white child who may have the same issues or concerns as the black child, i.e. with regards to maybe the mental health conditions, they're treated with kid gloves. They're given everything they need so that they can be nurtured and they can go through their academic process, and their mental health and wellness is something that is paramount. But whenever it comes to us, everything is put under a microscope. We're treated poorly, and it's just consistent. For me personally, if I had my way, I'd take all of our children out of all of these schools, and we would have our own schools. That is the main thing. We need our own schools. We need our own environments. We need to know that people that are, not all skin folk are kinfolk, but the fact of the matter is that our children academically, mentally, socially, emotionally do better when they're in their own environment. Just being here at in Detroit for the last week has shown me just the love and compassion we as a people actually have for each other. But because we're always on the go, because we're always having to battle, we're always on that treadmill, we don't actually get to do that. We don't get to sit down and have that conversation with our son or daughter properly. So sometimes I really, really put it back on parents to be that army for your son or daughter, because the rise in, children taking their own lives, self-harming, we can't allow this. We've come so far in such a short space of time. We have come so far. We keep beating ourselves up. We have come so far in such a short space of time. But unless we're empowering our children, when I say empower, I don't mean just teaching them about black history. I mean making sure they understand how the law works, understanding their rights and understanding how to challenge the system as they're coming up. Then, only then, we will be able to now stand firm and stand steadfast with regards to having our conviction of what we're saying, and also opening our own schools. We need to stop sending our children into the lion's mouth and expecting them to not be chewed up and spat out. We can't keep complaining about the same thing and not do anything to change it. It's almost as though we enjoy being oppressed, because I can't see anyone, coming to get slapped in the face every single day and crying about it. It doesn't make sense. Eventually, you're either going to slap back or you're going to stop going. And we seem to keep sending our children.
It's definitely true that some of the negative effects of the overt racism and these policies, the effect does have a long-term detriment on our insides. We start to internalize these beliefs, and these things do wear us out over time. Besides the Black Child Agenda, are there other independent advocacy organizations that are addressing this problem?
There are organizations. There are, I think, one or two. Are they independent? No. And I can say that unapologetically. The Black Child Agenda right now in the UK is the only organization that is not funded by anybody. We are not funded by government, by funding agencies or anybody else. The reason being is that makes sure that no one can tell me what to say, how to behave, what I can wear, when I can do things, what time I have to get up and do anything else. I make sure none of that restriction is put upon me. I wasn't born with shackles on my feet or hands or on my mind. My mama didn't raise a fool, she raised a warrior. And that is the spirit that I take into my organization. And when I go into schools, I'm known as the down specialist. Why? Because 99.9% of my cases are won. Why? Because I'm self-taught. I'm not a lawyer. I haven't studied law per se to go to the bar. I'm self-taught. When I look at other organizations, and this is not belittling anybody else's work, a lot of their clients end up coming to the Black Child Agenda because of our military and militant stance with these schools and with these teachers and head teachers. And secondly, because we're not funded, so we are 100% independent. There's no other organization from that perspective, but there are other organizations doing similar work to us, yes.
So we see that with the rate of your expansion and growth and the impact of your consistently offering these alternatives to living with the marginalization of their children, that your help to parents does reflect there is a need, and that parents and people do see they need guidance and support as related to the work that you're doing.
Absolutely. Every single day of the week, whether I'm in London, Manchester, Leeds, Birmingham, Bristol, I'm booked up every single day to go and advocate on behalf of parents and our young people, whether that be for a children's services meeting, like children in need, etc., mental health, and or with regards to education, every single day. And the thing is that my calls are increasing so much, and the children are getting younger. They're getting younger. The things that I see and I hear, it literally breaks my heart. However, the one thing that we do also empower parents on is the option of home education. A lot of our parents don't realize, they're so scared of the system that they don't realize that they actually have more power than they know. And that's one thing that we always do. When people hear me or they see me speaking at events, etc., they're blown away. And I'm like, well, no, there's nothing to be blown away by. Take back your power from these oppressors. Take back your power, because you're not going to be able to do any better. Our children who are killing each other in the UK, they see that the adults aren't acting as much as they could do, because a lot of the adults haven't been empowered. They just generally don't know. So they're just like, well, we're going to just do what we want. So we need to actually claw that back in. We need so desperately to claw that back in and get back our children before they are all completely lost to the system. And it's whether mental health institutions are popping up like confetti. We've got private prisons now in the UK. They're popping up left, right and centre. We've also got, like I said, the education system has practically been sold off, even though schools are supposed to answer to central government, which they're not doing. So every which way you look, we're becoming more and more like America with regards to the privatisation of the UK. But the one thing that we are doing, or our organisation is doing, is shouting very, very loudly and very, very clearly of what the law says. Not Cheryl Phoenix. This is what the law says. I don't need to make it up. Go and get the same books that I've read and go and get the same policies the schools are supposed to use, and let's just challenge you on your own policy. I will challenge you on what the law says. I will challenge you on what the government says that you have to do for these children. And that's all I do. I do nothing else.